lots going on right there.
Yeah, there's a ton that's going on there because one, George is making comparisons to like the magic of the wall and how maybe it's diminishing over time, but also how it is still there and it is still powerful. And you also have Bran looking at Mira climbing and wishing he could do that, but he's now on his own journey where he is down here and he still needs to look for something.
Yeah.
And how he wants to see the height of the world, but he's actually on his way to go be able to do that, but he's going to be able to do it through the eyes of a weirwood, which they go into later, not from climbing towers as a man. He'll actually be even more powerful by being able to go through ravens and everything. It's like you could almost sum up Bran's entire journey in this one, like, 2 paragraphs here.
Yeah, it's really good, right? And there's the big thing about, steps being made of the ice. Well, okay, well, the ice from the wall seems to have magical properties to it, which is kind of interesting. But we're also reminded of what happened to Bran at the beginning of the series by this, right? Like he climbed and he fell, but he still wants to climb. And that's kind of an admirable trait in a fantasy protagonist, or really any protagonist of any story, is that someone who wants to get up and do it again. That's kind of the mentality I think all of us wish we had. And even though Bran is confined to a wheelchair currently, he is still thinking, I would love to be up there, which I think is relatable in some regard. I mean, obviously I'm not in a wheelchair, but you know what I'm saying. When you get knocked down, you get back up.
Right. Yeah. And it kind of continues on a little bit here because then we kind of get a big lore dump here, and this is gonna be another big section. I'll read this as well. So there were a lot of dark doors in the Nightfort and a lot of rats. Bran could hear them scurrying through the vaults and cellars and the maze of pitch black tunnels that connected them. Jojen wanted to go poking around down there, but Hodor said Hodor to that, and Bran said no. There were worse things than rats down in the dark beneath the Nightfort. This seems an old place, Jojen said as they walked down a gallery where the sunlight fell into dusty shafts through empty windows. Twice as old as Castle Black, Bran said, remembering. It was the first castle on the wall and the largest, but it had also been the first abandoned, all the way back in the time of the old king. Even then, it had been 3/4 empty and too costly to maintain. Good Queen Alicent had suggested that the Watch replace it with smaller, newer castles at a spot only 7 miles east, where the wall curved along the shore of a beautiful green lake. Deep Lake had been paid for by the Queen's jewels and built by the men the old king had sent north, and the Black Brothers had abandoned the Nightfort to the rats. That was 2 centuries past, though. Now Deep Lake stood as empty as the castle it had been replaced, and then the Nightfort. There are ghosts here, Bran said. Hodor heard all of the stories before, but Jojen might not have. Old ghosts from the old king. Even before Aegon the Dragon, 79 deserters who went south to be outlaws. One was Lord Roswell's youngest son, so when they reached the Barrowlands, they sought shelter at his castle. But Lord Roswell took them captive and returned them to the Nightfort. The Lord Commander had holes hewn in the top of the wall, and he put the deserters in them and sealed them up alive in the ice. They have spears and horns, and they all face north. The 79 Sentinels, they're called. They left their post in life, so in death their watch goes on forever.
So metal,
so ridiculous,
so
cool. Years later, when Lord Ryswell was old and dying, he had himself carried to the Nightfort so he could take the Black and stand beside his son. He sent him back to the wall for honor's sake, but he loved him still, so he came to share his watch.
Dude, like that's the stuff I love about this series. Like that is just such a, some people would say, oh, we didn't need to know that, but there's a little bit here. Okay. And what I was thinking about is like they're freezing human beings in the wall, right? So we always talk about blood magic. But does blood require like literal blood being spilled, or is it something about the human being?
Is it like just killing somebody?
Right. Like the spirit of someone or the soul of someone being trapped or used, or their essence or whatever it might be. Is there a chance that the reason why the wall is magical is because there have been other bodies put into the wall? Like, is that something that we could consider here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that's why some people think there is actually a dragon in the wall. These like will these things bust out of the wall at some
Could you
point?
imagine?
I mean, like when we see the crypts of Winterfell, and that was like, oh, that was scary because they're down there, and then all the skeletons
Yeah,
and stuff come out. Like maybe we'll get something like that, but it's going to be the wall, and all
yeah.
these creatures and other things come in. And maybe they're like maybe there are dragons, and like there is like an ice dragon embedded in the wall, and that's what created it, right?
Could
Like
you
that's
imagine?
yeah, and maybe that's where Dan and Dave got the idea for pulling the dragon out of the lake.
Could be. I mean, it certainly could be. I imagine that budget was a little bit cheaper than doing the entire wall, spawning dragon or dragons, maybe.
Right.
But yeah, dude, I think that this is like one of the cooler lore dumps in a brand chapter, which, I always just question why people don't like brand chapters. I think this
They're
stuff is like the
amazing.
best. I think it's the best.
Yeah, oh, they no, they're amazing. And then it continues on too. I mean, and then I'll pull down a little bit here. Uh so Mira comes back, right? And he says, "What did you see?" Her brother Jojen asks her. "I saw the haunted forest," she said in a wistful tone. "Hills rising wild as far as the eye can see, covered with trees that no axe has ever touched. I saw the sunlight glinting off a lake and clouds sweeping in from the west. I saw patches of old snow and icicles long as pikes. I even saw an eagle circling. I think he saw me too. I waved at him," which, that part is like, that's actually not what you should have done. Right. Because
Right.
we, as
Yeah.
the reader, know, like, of course, nothing ever really happens with that. But, we know that that's actually, the wildlings and Oral on the other side coming down, and they probably saw him. But I just love every description we get, especially if um, everything just north of the wall, right? Like the haunted
Yeah.
forest and like icicles long as pikes, like they can see these things, and it does feel magical. But maybe
Hmm.
it's just that, is it actually magical up there, or is it just the world, and the world below the wall has had diminished magic? Because there's still weirwoods everywhere, and those are
Yeah.
magical.
Yeah, maybe they removed some of the magic from the world whenever they started to, modernize Westeros, at least for that age. I mean, that's certainly possible. But it's also just a sense of wonder of going somewhere that you've never been. Or she's talking about like, axes have never graced these trees. Like, isn't there is something magical about going out into nature and seeing these places that humans have not, for lack of a better word, contaminated. Whenever I was in like deep forest in Ireland, I felt that like it almost does. Some people will describe it as almost like a spiritual experience, but for me, it feels magical. It's
Right.
like, you know, has anyone ever stood at this exact spot? Like that kind of thing. And we are on an adventure with this group, and we're seeing the next level that they're about to go to, right? Like they're going to go beyond the wall. We're talking about a place where maybe no one else has walked. Like those type of things, I think lend itself to a bit of like grand epic adventure feel for Bran and in the crew.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, I agree, because we talked about this last week's chapter, but that's really what last week, and we did part one of this. But that's really what this chapter is, and I love that George is giving us the lore dump here as well,
Yeah.
because this chapter ultimately is like Bran. We're going to be going through, like, this is kind of his final goodbye to just being Bran,
Hmm.
and now we're about to enter him really becoming the three-eyed crow.
Yeah. This is kind of it. And leaving a world that feels very familiar for one that has been, for all intents and purposes, untreaded. I'm sure the wildlings have been all over it, but yeah,
Yeah.
for someone like him, definitely uncharted territory.
Yeah. Okay. So it continues on a little bit more here, and this is where we get our lore dump of the Night King, the Night's King, I should
Yeah.
say. Right. The tale of the Night's King. He'd been the 13th man to lead the Night's Watch. This is Old Nan telling Bran, and Bran is remembering it. She said, "A warrior who knew no fear, and that was the fault in him. All men must know fear. A woman was his downfall. A woman glimpsed from atop the wall with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars. Fearing nothing, he chased her and caught her and loved her, though her skin was as cold as ice. And when he gave her his seed, to her give his soul as well. He brought her back to the Nightfort and proclaimed her a queen and himself her king. And with strange sorceries, he bound his sword brothers to his will. For 13 years, they had ruled, Night's king and his corpse queen, till finally the Starks, the Winterfell, and Winterfell and Joramun, and the wildlings had joined to free the witch from bondage. And we kind of know the rest of this. Old Nan says some say he was a Bolton, some say he was a Magnar out of Skagos, some say Umber, Flint, which you also hear about brave Danny Flint at the beginning here, right? And so here Flint comes back, or Nori. Some would have you think he was a Woodfoot from those who ruled Bear Island before the Iron Men came. He never was. He was a Stark, the brother of the man who brought him down. She always pinched Bran on the nose. Then would he ever forget it? He was a Stark of Winterfell, and who can say? Mayhaps his name was Brandon. Mayhaps he slept in this very bed in this same room. And then Bran says, no, he walked this castle where we'll sleep tonight.
Which the first thing that pops in my mind, because I'm a crazy theorist in this series, is, are all Brandon's Bran? That's what
Correct.
A lot of people ask, and it's like, so are we actually hearing about a story that is about Bran from the future interacting with the past, and who would be the corpse queen? I also just immediately think, a Stark being with someone maybe from up north. Obviously, we have Ygritte, right? But there's also the idea of Val. Like, we've talked about Val a lot, and the huge question mark in the books that is nowhere near in the show. I mean, it's completely left out. So is there a chance that like Jon Snow and Val might be some sort of parallel example of the Night's King and the Corpse Bride?
Yeah. Agreed. And that's